Well, good morning. Hello, everyone. It's actually morning in California, not anywhere else. But just welcome to our August webinar brought to you by the SILA Foundation. I'm Cindy Davidson, the Education Trustee for the SILA Foundation. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar, welcome. We conduct one of these every month on topics that we feel are of interest to people in the insurance securities licensing space. If you've joined us before, welcome back. You now qualify as a frequent flyer. And it's my pleasure today. We are so fortunate to hear from Nancy Germond, who is kind of a legend in the insurance training world. I know Nancy through the Society of Insurance Trainers and Educators, which is also known as SITE. She's the president of a company called Insurance Writer, a risk management consulting and communications firm. She's the author of a multitude of articles, white papers, and presentations in the insurance space. And she's here today as the resident faculty member from Glendale Community College in Phoenix, Arizona, where she teaches rising professionals in our business. Nancy's here to tell us all about our inbound workforce, what they're like, how we can maximize their talents, and how we can provide support so they bring the greatest amount of value to our industry. So without further ado, I'll welcome Nancy Germond.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining. We have a lot of information to go over today, so I'm excited that you're here. I just want to give you a little background about me. I'm a second-generation insurance professional. My parents were insurance agents, both my mother and my father, and then later my brother. So the only difference is I have a master's degree in sociology. So by training, I'm a sociologist. So I see everything through a little bit different lens. I call myself the world's oldest millennial because I have much more of a millennial mindset in my career path. What I did was these 3 and 4 year stints to learn as much as I could around a broad range of the P&C and financial services industry. So I'm going to talk today because I do teach at Glendale, and we have a very up-and-coming insurance program where we offer an associate in risk management or a certificate, or I'm sorry, an associate in risk management and insurance, and we'll talk about that, and also a certificate program. And so I have a very special milieu that I come from. So our college is about 28%, 18 to 19, 34%, 20 to 24, but many of our students are resumers, what we call resumers, 25 through 49 and 50 plus, and that's about half of our population. Few of our students go full-time. Most of them, I would say, go part-time because they're working. We have a lot of students that are economically disadvantaged. We are a Hispanic serving community, so we're 49% Hispanic in terms of racial makeup, and about 39% Caucasian. So it's a very interesting community, and I think that I'm going to say some things today because I do have that training in sociology that may kind of make you scratch your head. So we're going to talk today about the challenges we do face today in hiring, and we have a lot. Who is coming into the workforce, and you won't like some of the answers. What do young people want in their career? What are the positive traits that they bring? Because we are very negative about young talent. When you get around boomer professionals, we are pretty negative. And I hope to change that mindset a little bit today because they're bringing in different skill sets than we had. We're going to talk about which insurance organizations are going to be most impacted by the gap in skills and how do we more efficiently manage our workforce. So who are we hiring? And we're going to go over each of these kind of points. 20% of today's college students have a psychiatric diagnosis. It may be bipolar, it may be manic depression. It's very often ADHD. We have a lot of students that are high functioning autistic coming into the classroom. and then segueing on into the workforce. So we're going to talk today about how do you manage a person with a psych diagnosis. Half of the college students in this survey that I pulled these two statistics from felt hopeless in the past year. How do you manage employees who come to work and feel hopeless? That's a challenge. They want a flexible work schedule, and they want fast track to management. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Our young employees are very financially naive. One of the things I point out is that their student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy, and they have no idea. They don't know many little financial tips that I learned from my parents, right? Young employees may not align politically with your organization, and we're going to look at some Pew research and some RAND research that's very, very good. So what do young people want in a career? They want great entry-level pay. They really, I've seen some of the gals that I mentored turn down jobs with a BA or a BS of $38,000 and said that that's not enough money with no job experience, just the bachelor's. In one case, this gal had 2 bachelors. At least 45 to 60,000 with a BA or a BS. They really feel that and they will tell you, I am bringing something to you. They can't tell you exactly what they're bringing, but they will definitely tell you, I'm bringing you something. My husband's a plumbing contractor, and we see the same thing when we try to hire plumbers, the less experienced plumbers. Flexibility, flex time. They want to work from home. They want a compressed work week. They want to use social media at work. They want to be on their cell phones. They want career pathing, and we promise them that you will get a career path. And I think the bigger carriers, the bigger insurers are doing a good job of that, but we have to do better. Fast track to management positions. The 2 questions my students ask me is when I talk about my insurance program, because I also teach other business courses, the 2 questions that they say are, how much does it pay? Talking about entry-level insurance, and how quickly can I be a manager? And I used to think it's because they thought managers didn't do anything, but what I think it is because one of my colleagues argued with me. My colleague said, no, they see management as exciting. And these are kids with short attention spans. Television started it, and social media has finished it. They have very short attention spans. So they want to move up quickly. And they want an organization that gives back to the community, whether it's days off to volunteer, whether it's home builds. There's a lot of different ways. And the generations, I've got this in the slide deck. I assume you'll get a copy of it if you would like it. But Gen Z is what's coming into the workforce born after 1996. When we talk about millennials, very often we include Gen X from 65 to 80. But really they are discrete, and there is a little bit of difference between them, not a lot, when you look at the Pew research. So let's look at one of the Pew research polls. And again, Pew, very reputable in terms of good statistics. So Gen Z and millennials differ from older generations in a lot of ways, and this is who is coming into the workforce. Look at their approval of Trump's job rating. You compare it to the silence at 54%, boomers at 43%, Gen Z is at 30%. Well, 1 percentage point higher than millennials. Gen X's, it's at 38% approval. So you can see, and you'll see it all along the line here, that they become, as they're younger, they are less conservative. Age a lot of times makes them more so, but with life experience, people change. So government should do more to solve problems. 70% and 64%, and over half of your workforce for your Gen X through Gen Z believe now what that translates to is if government should be doing something, so should this organization. Increasing racial and ethnic diversity, they believe it's good for society. You have to remember, these kids were raised very differently if you're a boomer than we were. Where I went to high school, there were two persons of color. There were quite a few Hispanic because I'm in Phoenix. But the truth of the matter is these kids do not see race the same way that a boomer or a silent sees it, which is great. It's good for, and they believe that this increasing diversity is good. So I want to jump right into something important, criminal histories. Younger Americans, and this is according to a RAND study, and RAND is another very, very prestigious, really good data. Younger Americans are much more likely to have been arrested than previous generations, and that growth is largest among white and women, especially white women. Now, I have volunteered at Maricopa County Jail for well over a decade, and I have seen a tremendous shift in the demographics of the women. And I only work on the women's side. My husband volunteers on the men's side. He has not seen it as markedly. I see today it's almost all white women that are incarcerated. It's crazy, and a lot of it is fraud and getting involved with somebody that leads them into a life of crime. So it's disturbing, but this is a trend. And RAND, their last study, and it was just published, I think, in January and I've got links to it. Very interesting study. The growing criminalization of American youth is likely a critical driver of this trend. Kids that, I was a wild and crazy kid, and I grew up here in Phoenix, and I went to high school with half the Phoenix police force at one time. So, the crazy things we did, we got passes on. They don't give passes anymore. So you're going to have a huge number of people come with criminal records. This leads to negative trends in later life, depression, lack of earning opportunity, inability to get jobs, and especially in financial services when there's been any kind of fraud, theft. Two of my students who have been through my program. One had several DUI felonies. She was a veteran, and she's been hired by one of the nation's biggest insurers. She's been there about 8 months. She's already received a promotion. They knew about the DUIs. They were willing to put her in a non-driving position. I have another student who had a battery, which is an assault, and she can't find work. So I'm trying to help her work through that to see if we can get her hired somewhere. It's difficult, but the percentage of U.S. population arrested at least once before age 26, before 1949, 6.4%. Between 1979 and 1988, that's birth year, 23%. So you have to expect about a quarter of your candidates are going to have some kind of conviction. So what goes with that is low self-esteem. They won't show up for job interviews. You offer them a job and they'll ghost you. You have to be more proactive if you want that candidate. And you have to think, how are we going to hire around a criminal record? What can we accept and what can't we accept? Managing employees with a psychiatric disorder, you're going to have to learn some tactics there, because 1 in 4 young adults has a diagnosable mental illness per NAMI. And NAMI is, very good with statistics and very, very one of the strongest advocates for those with a mental illness. Now, again, some of it is going to be ADHD. It's going to run a range of emotional distresses. But more than 80% of college students felt overwhelmed and 45% felt hopeless in the year prior to that study that I cited. So SAMHSA, 1 in 7 young adults between 18 to 25 had a substance abuse disorder in 2017. So I've included a link, and it's really old, but I myself have been in recovery for 34 years. I came into the workforce at about 27. I had only worked for my parents, had some waitress jobs because I had a drinking problem. And when I finally got a handle on it and went to a 12-step program that helped me out, I had bosses that were completely supportive. And I don't know that I would have made it any other way, because I was still pretty I don't know the word for it, emotionally labile. That's the clinical term. So I've included a link to probably the oldest and best literature on how to manage an employee with a substance abuse disorder, and it's from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a link to it. It's called To the Employer. So if you want to learn about how to manage employees with these kinds of disorders, just take a look at that. It doesn't necessarily include mental illness. You're going to have to get speakers to come in. You can get trainers that work at SAMHSA to come in. But in any performance issue, I highly recommend that you rule out, is the problem related to mental health or substance abuse? Because if you terminate and you know that it is related, you could end up with an Americans with Disabilities issue if that person is, saying, well, I need to go into treatment. It can be a problem. So where you're going to have problems is with productivity, start time. I would say 10 to 15% of my students feel no shame about walking in every day to my classes late. It just doesn't bother them. It's that sense of kind of entitlement. You have to build confidence, because very often their self-esteem is just beat up. Very often those with ADHD, such as me, I also have ADHD, will not want that, no matter how challenging the job is. And I have had some amazing jobs in risk management that were so challenging and changed every day. And yet I would get bored because I'd want to go learn something new. So the way to manage around that we'll talk about. They want flexible work schedules. Again, today's young people have a different relationship with time that we can't relate. If I'm even 10 minutes not early, I get sick to my stomach. But I just find that the less experienced worker, time is more relative. So you have to consider work at home to attract out-of-state candidates, because this job market is very tight. You want to consider flex time, a compressed work week. A good friend of mine that works at one of the specialty insurers here in Scottsdale, in the excess surplus lines market, just stepped down as a manager because she didn't want to be at work all 5 days of the week. So she went back to being an examiner, and she's much happier. And so it was a win-win. The company got to keep her, but not as a manager. So sometimes we have to put our ego aside as a manager and just kind of eat crow. The other thing that I see a lot of is a personality conflict between the manager and the employee. And in the insurance industry, we are loath to transfer people to new managers. We think, no, you all need to work it out. A lot of times I've found it's just better to bite the bullet and transfer that employee to a different manager where there may be not a personality clash, or they can get a new start. But flexible work schedules, of course, don't excuse lack of communication. You still have to hold their feet to the fire. A recent survey in 2014, more than 3/4 of U.S. employers allow at least some workers to change their start and quitting time. 56% of full-time workers have flexible work hours. So it's really the trend. If you probably have already experienced and had to manage the 4-day work week, and the 980 is another one. All right, so financially naive employees, which I alluded to, 4 in 5 workers today live paycheck to paycheck, and 10% of 6-figure earners struggle financially. So what does that mean? Well, we're in financial services. The last thing we want is employees to be struggling financially, because it puts us at risk, right? We know that any time that there's fraud, not any time, but many times when there's fraud, there's a profile, and it's very often involves substance abuse. It involves gambling. It involves getting in a new relationship, and that person entices them into things that they wouldn't have done. So you have to keep your eye on employees that are struggling. Half of Americans spend time at work managing their personal finances. So you want to consider some program like Smart Dollar or some other financial management program. Bring in educators. Teach them about a debt snowball. Dave Ramsey is another great way. I recommend it to my students. You have to be sure that you get the right facilitator. But again, financial woes, and especially in financial services, is a big problem. It can lead to mental health issues, employee fraud, poor attendance. So again, you get back to that rule out. When you start to see spotty attendance, that's where you want to click in right away and say, what's going on here? All right, we know that we're going to be managing employees who may not politically align with your organization. And I'm a perfect example of a square peg in the round insurance hole. My parents both, my dad was a Barry Goldwater guy. I've got pictures of him introducing him at Rotary Club. I'm a Rotary Club member. The thing is, though, our industry, financial services, insurance, we are notoriously very conservative. And so this new generation is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation we've ever seen. So the conventional wisdom has always been, we're just not going to talk politics. So there's this isn't going to fly with this generation. Some of them are private, but there's a lot of people today that are way more open. And I'm one of those people. I just bring my whole self to work. And I remember talking to my boss one time when I worked in the excess surplus market, and she said and I was saying, well, so-and-so just never communicates. And she said, well, Nancy, not everyone's book is life is an open book like yours. And so, I had to kind of laugh, but what's wrong with bringing your whole self to work? Because we spend more time with our workers. So you have to, again, figure out how to manage around the politics. So here's more Pew research. Even Gen Z Republicans are more likely than other Republicans to say that blacks aren't treated fairly. So look at lean Republican versus Democrat, we're 82%, and even 82% of millennials. And Gen X's, it's at 78%, which really almost aligns with, Democrats all along. But you are going to hire a lot of young people who are not allied with either party. They're Green Party, they might be Democrat. You have to figure it out as a manager. How do we manage these what could be volatile conversations? Because according to Pew, younger generation hold significantly different views than you and I as boomers do, or many of you. They are more accepting and insistent on diversity. I want to tell you a story. I had a student who was high functioning autistic, but the days that his meds weren't working, he would sit in his chair and he would spin in his chair and just kind of point to the ceiling. And yet I have my students and this was a communications class. I have my students work in groups a lot so that they get to know each other and learn to work in teams. And I would think, okay, I'm going to divide them up into groups today, and it's going to be tough. At first, I worried about that. These kids have been mainstreamed. They have worked, they've all throughout their school history, they've worked with kids with differences. They were so kind and so loving to this young man, and they included him. They didn't, it was amazing. So this generation, this is one of the most wonderful things that they bring to the workforce. The other thing is that climate change is a major concern. I always tell my students, you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to do a better job than we boomers have done, because they are very concerned about climate change. So let's talk. Are we too focused on young talent? And I never use the words young to say, other than in this setting, I couldn't think of a better word. But when I'm talking about I need to hire a younger worker, I'm setting myself up. Number one, I'm cutting out a lot of talent. And number two, I'm setting myself up for an EEOC claim, which we don't want to do. So we want to talk about less experience versus more experience rather than older workers or elderly, especially don't use the word elderly. But what happened in 2008 when we had our big recession, The insurance industry should have been out recruiting. That's when we should have gone to the construction industries and started looking for estimators and project managers and hired them and trained them as adjusters. And we wouldn't be facing the adjusting talent problem that we have today. We missed that boat. We shouldn't miss it. We should be we are hyper focused on young talent, and that is a problem because ageism and age discrimination in our industry abounds. I could tell you names, I could sit here and list people on two hands that are older workers, more experienced workers that can't find work. Once you hit about 45, ageism really hits in our industry. So we should be looking at other collateral industries. I can't tell you how many times I've been waited on and started talking to a waitress and said, she says, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work at the insurance industry. And she said, well, I have my insurance license, but I just didn't like it. When you see people from other industries, restoration, hospitality, construction, and they have great customer service skills, they would be perfect in our industry. So we need to be poaching talent wherever we can find it. A lot of people are stuck in dead-end jobs. In insurance, the last thing it is dead end. You just can have an amazing career. And so we need to be bringing those people over to our industry. We can teach them insurance. You can't always teach the insurance geek great customer service skills. Isn't that true? Cooperating with workers' compensation carriers. I taught for quite a few years and still do occasionally for Vail. And Vail is the oldest training facility in the United States for adjusters. So one of my interesting finds there was one of the workers' compensation carriers had a gentleman in his 50s, and he was a carpenter, and he got injured. He fell on the job. He could not go back to being a carpenter. He really didn't have the skills necessarily for project management because he really only knew carpentry, but he understood how buildings were built. So it was Zurich, I believe, and Zurich sent him, the workers' comp adjuster sent him to Texas for 3 weeks to get him retrained as an adjuster. I helped him get a job, and last I heard, he's still working. So we want to be looking at older talent, because the reality is I anticipate I'll work till I'm 70. The reality is we are going to financially have to work longer. I like what I do, but a lot of people will be forced financially to work longer. So the reality is if you hire somebody at 50, you can get 15 years or 20 years out of them. Yeah, health costs are a little higher, but I'll tell you what, they really get it about showing up on time and some old school skills that we have that maybe the younger generation doesn't all have. So who is going to be impacted most by these talent gaps? Call centers. A lot of my students are recruited by call centers. And this is insurers that operate, I'm not going to name names, but they operate mainly by phone. They don't really necessarily have a field force. They're going to be less impacted by this talent gap because what they're competing against is Discover Card, American Express, other call centers, Amazon perhaps. But if you pay a little more, you'll be able to get the talent that you need. But who's going to be hurt? Financial services. Companies that need claims and underwriting with a lot of experience. Zurich recruits right out of the industry. They will take guys in their 30s and gals in their 30s, 40s, 50s out of industry and then put them in as loss prevention people. So they've worked in oil and gas, they've worked in coal, they've worked in railroads, and that is a great model. So the carriers are going to be impacted are oil and gas, cyber, wet marine. Our reinsurers are going to get crunched. All excess and surplus lines carriers are struggling for talent. We have many of them here in Scottsdale today, and they all have pretty much, they're all hiring. Carriers who specialize in large accounts, MGAs and brokerages are all going to be struggling for talent, and of course, financial services advisory. So we put all our efforts into recruiting millennials. That's the focus of most of our financial services and insurance firms today. You knock people out as overqualified. It's illegal, for one thing. To call somebody overqualified will be, it's a euphemism for old. And so saying, oh, we'll run this ad and say maximum number of years of experience, don't do that. A fun corporate culture in your ad is another euphemism for young. So this is all advice from AARP, who works with people, 50 and over trying to find jobs. 61% reported to AARP if they were over 45, they have been discriminated against. And it is a real issue. Mostly where they rule them out is you never even make it into the hiring process. And then here's what else happens. I was unusual in that I was promoted to a management position at 5 years. Today, that's not unusual. So you have people sitting in supervisory and management positions that might be 30 years old. They're interviewing. You look at a whole panel. You're 60, say, you're looking for a job. You go in and you're faced with a panel of 4 people, maybe one who is above 50 years old. The rest are 25, 30, 35 years old. They're newer, younger, less experienced managers. You don't stand a chance because they don't relate to you. So this is another way to have a problem with EEOC. So make sure that your hiring panels are staggered in age. If you're going to put one highly experienced panel together of senior managers, break it up and put a couple senior managers with a couple of less experienced managers so that your age range, you really get a fair presentation, or you're going to be excluding some older older, in this case, workers. So I've talked about some of the negatives. What are some of the positive traits? Again, they're empathetic. My students are empathetic. Let me tell you about my students. They're almost all, many of them have children. They almost all have at least one, if not 2 to 3 jobs. A lot of them are doing Uber and Lyft. I have a lot of first generation in the country. Their parents brought them over as infants, or they were born here and have been in the U.S., but their parents are from Africa or from Guatemala. So where me as an insurance professional, when I didn't know something, I could go get the FCNS bulletin, or I could call my dad on the phone and say, hey, I don't understand this coverage. Their parents cannot give them that. Their parents cannot help them maneuver the politics and the technical expertise that they need to navigate. So it's very important, if you have first generation born here, that they have great mentorship, and they're not all astute enough to ask for it, to ask for help. The younger generation are going to be very good with technology. They're comfortable with differences. They want a career. And this is what our industries offer them, a career, not just a job. And that's what we need to be pushing. These are kids that are comfortable and insist on diversity. They bring so many positive things. I had one student that was actually raising all his nieces and nephews because his relative, that the father and mother had both been dysfunctional. So here he is going to school full-time, working 2 jobs, driving for Uber, and raising his nieces and nephews. I mean, wouldn't you want that person in your workforce? Because that's a problem solver right there. So how do you become a better manager to these younger workers? Number one, you've got to be patient and resist that urge to get with your other managers and say, I'm pulling my hair out here. Look for solutions. Get outside the box of bringing in these amazing keynote speakers who can, as I said in an article I wrote recently, teach you how to juggle with chainsaws, and go to the homeless shelter and ask the executive director to come talk to you. How do you manage people who are hopeless, who have some mental difficulties, maybe new in sobriety, may have some relapses in and out, because they may not ask for help. I have students that I watch grades really closely, and I see that they're floundering, and I will talk to them. I'll say, hey, stay after class. Plus, I'll send them an email and say, hey, come over to my office hours. Let's talk. And it's like deer in the headlights. They don't know how to ask for or accept help. And so you've got to keep kind of like a woodpecker, just kind of keep drilling it in that, I'm here to help you. That's my job. Have an open door policy. Do two-way mentorship so that older workers or experienced workers are working with less experienced workers. They can mentor each other in different ways. Experienced workers find out more about technology and what's cool with the younger generation, and they have more to talk about. I didn't even know what Snapchat was till I asked one of my students, well, I know Facebook is out, so what's in? And he's like, oh, you got to get on Snapchat, right? So these two-way mentorship plans are win-wins. Here's a problem, and I see it in every insurance company I consult with. We have our managers and our supervisors so buried in project management that they forget to get into the work product. And so nothing gets solved until it blows up. So just a tip, stay in the work product. Make sure that if you're sending an employee to any kind of training, that there is follow-on. You know what they got trained in, and you're making sure that that training flows into the work project. And I could do a whole seminar on that, but it's make sure that you are talking to the trainers and holding your trainers' feet to the fire, that they are giving you check sheets so that you know what was taught in the class, and you can make sure that any training is not just going in one ear and out the other. It's showing up in your work product. That's really important. We also have to reframe what we do. 8 out of 10 millennials are not familiar with insurance as a career path, and our industry is just really poor. The insurance industry, everybody thinks it's these sales shucksters, right? And that's not it at all. Less than 1 in 10 young professionals consider an insurance career, and this is all from the institutes. But when you rebrand it, which we are doing both here in Grand Canyon University and Glendale Community, we are rebranding to be risk management / insurance. Because when you ask an employee, how would you like to a job where you analyze risk and you solve problems and recommend solutions? And 60% of them then say, yeah, I'd really like that. So we have to rebrand what we do. So what are some of the solutions we've talked about? We've talked about flexible work hours, and that really is just mandatory. At a minimum, being able to say, open your doors 6 to 6 so that they can choose some different hours. We are promising our students career pathing. These are not students that are necessarily, once they come into the workforce, they have expectations that you are going to have a clear career path that they can choose from. So you want to take them through these short, 6 months in this department, 3 months in this department, so that they can understand how the whole business operates. When I started out in the industry, we very often I started as a policy typist. I was a terrible typist, so quickly I moved, elsewhere. So, but they had a career path for me. They knew that they were going to spin me through departments. Use millennials to build your brand. Very good recruiting is out there. Look at mypath.com, I believe it is, and that's the Institute's branding for the insurance industry. And we have our millennials that have gotten jobs come back and talk to our new students, and we try to get them to do videos. Millennials are great for building your brand to other millennials. When I go talk about what a great career insurance has been to me, very often I get a lot of blank stares. The other thing is, in my classes, I bring in a lot of people of color, because I see my students of color. I see their eyes light up when I bring in a Black or Hispanic producer who says, here's how I did it. They think, I can do it too. And you see that their faces light up. It's just this hope. Promote community involvement. For workers' comp, if they're injured and can't go back to work, put them in the community, put them at the food bank with your t-shirt, with your logo on it. Do habitat builds. There's many, many ways to promote community involvement. Provide development. They want to continue their education. Discover, the credit card has a wonderful program. It's an award-winning program that GCC put together, where we actually go into Discover Card here in Phoenix, and they're getting their entire associate's degree, and then they'll go on and get an advanced degree. And bring in development, pay for and promote continuing education. We talked about harvesting from other industries. Very important. Whenever you see somebody, I can't tell you at Starbucks, there's people I wish I could hire because their customer service is so good. And we can teach them insurance. Send them to the community colleges that are teaching this. Rio here in Phoenix has a nationwide online, and we teach the AINS designation, the Associate in Insurance Studies. We use all branded curriculum from the Big I, or not the Big I, from the institutes. Short cycles through other departments. Again, think about when you see employees that are restless, think about the ADHD model, that it might just be time to give them a new challenge. Showcase the diversity in your own workers. Talk to everybody. I don't care if you're at the bank. Poach people. We should be poaching from other industries, people with great customer service skills. Develop a knowledge transfer. So here's what's happening. We have these older workers, experienced workers, walking out today, and there is no knowledge transfer. So here you've got an adjuster who always relied on Charles, who's worked every major cat since before Katrina, since Andrew, and he or she walks out the door with the name of, the top engineers and the top expert witnesses up in his or her brain. Develop a knowledge transfer system, and you've got to bring in consulting for that. You've got to memorialize this data that's in your experienced people's brains. Hone in on flight risks. Now, how do you know somebody's a flight risk? Because they're starting trouble. They're usually stirring up trouble. So employees who have a sudden change in work habit, they may be going through a divorce, depression, increasing negativity usually starts to, swirl around them. I call them the drama creators. Those who may feel stuck, they may have a personality conflict with their manager that they can't seem to get around. Bored employees. If employees who are bored, especially your ADHD employees, will begin to show signs of discontent. So the best managers I've worked for, and the way I manage, is I do a check-in every day with the employees I've managed. Hey, what's going on? How are things? How are the kids? Just take 15 minutes out of the beginning of every day and touch base with your employees. You want to know what's going on. You can also have a flight risk analysis done by outside firms, and I would highly recommend, if you're having a lot of churn, that you might do that, because losing employees today in this market that they're calling compressed, and it's a scary market to go try and replace good talent. All right. I don't know why my slide isn't moving. Okay, so think about what is the one key takeaway from today that you could go back and easily act upon. Could you better understand today's workforce? Could you talk to your other managers about it? Would you read some of the resources I've given you? Institute or strengthen your knowledge transfer. If that's all you do out of this, you're in better shape than I'd say about 50 or 60% of the companies that haven't even started thinking about it. And I've been talking about it. I wrote the first paper that I ever saw on brain drain in the insurance industry. It's in your notes there. And I think my first version was 2010. And I know very few companies that have a formal knowledge transfer plan, and that's going to be a problem. Learn more about how to manage workers with mental health challenges. What could you do? Do you have community resources where you could have people come in and do some lunch and learns? And expand your recruiting horizons. What can you do to recruit smarter, to maybe shift your emphasis off of younger workers who are awesome, but there's a lot of talent out there that either could be retrained or that just are not getting the job interviews that their resumes demand. They really should be getting those interviews. So some resources, I've got the brain drain article I wrote. facts to know about young people. Has the insurance industry missed the recruiting boat? The RAND study is here. Key political trends from the Pew Social Trends Research. Jack Welch, and of course, GE's in the news, and not in a good way today. On political discourse at work, where he talks about bringing your whole self and talk politics at work. Managing mental health in the workforce. This is a nice workplace strategies for mental health is a very reputable resource. And of course, the chapter, I think it's chapter 10 from the AA Big Book, Managing the Recovering Employee. And it's very archaic. It's written very toward male employees, but I'll tell you, it's still a very good piece of literature. And if you want to contact me, here's my contact information. I am always happy to talk.
Wow. All I can say is wow. And thank you, Nancy. That was fantastic.
You're welcome.
Yeah, really appreciate the insights you brought to this very important topic. We're happy to field some questions. I know that we put up in the chat that anyone in the audience, and we still have pretty much everybody still here. So if you guys have questions, we have a couple minutes left. We could address them. I don't see anything popping in quite yet, but and then I'll do a little commercial for, we have 3 more webinars coming up between now and the end of the year. Next month, well, actually September we're going to, because that's our annual conference. October, we'll be talking, Bill Wilson's going to join us, Nancy, for how to win a claim, a disputed claim. So he's going to talk to us about claims in his book, When Worlds Collide. And then, or Words Collide, I think it is. And then November, we've got the commissioner from Nevada who's going to join us and talk about a day in the life of an insurance commissioner. And then on in December, I think Barb Gavitt's speaking on death by public speaking. So please be on the lookout for invitations to the next couple of webinars. Also be working, the education committee's working on topics for next year. So we'll be recruiting some speakers just like I went out and recruited Nancy for today. So we've got a couple of questions came in. So one is, the first one is, what's a diplomatic way to tell your manager you need to be challenged more? It looks bad to say I'm bored.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily use that word, but I would first make an appointment, because nobody likes things sprung on them. I would say, hey, I want to chat about where I'm going in my career, and actually set a time, and then have some bullet points of what you want to discuss. But also, most managers don't want employees to come with a problem without a solution. What is it that you think you could do that would challenge you? Say, you know, there's this upcoming project I know about, and I'm thinking I would be a good fit for that, and it would really help round me out. But you always want to couch it in terms of what is it, what's in it for me, what's in it for the organization, in other words. A little bit about what's in it for you, but what do you bring to that project? So make an appointment, be diplomatic. Don't use the word bored, just say, I'm ready for a new challenge. And I think, and if you can find something, otherwise, if there's nothing floating around in the employee kind of gossip about what's up and coming, ask your boss, would you keep an eye out for a project where you think I might be a fit? And I'll check back with you in a couple weeks, and keep checking in. The squeaking wheel gets the grease.
Great advice. Now, we also have another question about managing remote virtual employees. What have you observed in terms of best practices? I did notice in the slides that, you know, the new employees are looking for flexible work schedule, but communication is considered to be really key to that. So what are your thoughts on managing remote employees? Well,
it's a double-edged sword, because when employees have a tendency toward depression, if you allow them to work at home, it's going to be probably harder for them. And so you have to make sure without, taking in mind that you're maybe managing an employee with some other problems, that they stay working. And the only way to do that is you have to be in the files. You have to have your own paper trail. They have to understand that communication is key, that there's meetings they have to still come to. The work product cannot suffer, and you can't let it go if you find that it is. You have to nip it in the bud and bring them back so that there's a consequence if they're just going home and not getting the work done. Those are some kind of issues that come up, but there's lots of literature out there that from people who have done it a lot more than I have, because this is a newer trend than, I haven't been a manager in 10 years, so I probably don't have much more advice than that.
Well, fantastic. We are pretty much running up against the end of our time. So I'm sure Nancy would be open to hearing from any of the attendees if you would rather contact her privately. And she was nice enough to give us her contact information. So thank you for that. Thanks everyone for attending. I hope this was helpful. I learned a bunch. So again, thanks so much, Nancy. And we'll go ahead and close this one out.
Thank you.